Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Before we start our Torah portion, the last Torah portion, we're going to read the Creed. We remind ourselves what the greatest commandment is. Above all, Yeshua is approached and they ask him what the greatest commandment is. And Yeshua quotes the Shema. He says, Shema im Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And it translates, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord our God is one. V'yechavta et Adonai Elohecha, uvechol levavcha, uvechol nafshucha, uvechol nechudecha. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, and with all your soul. By these two great commandments hang all the law and the prophets, and the second is like unto it. And you shall love your neighbour as you love yourself. The entire Bible is based upon them two commandments: to love our God with all our heart, strength and soul, and to love our neighbour as we love ourselves. Do we hear it? Hear, O Israel. Let it be made known. Shema it. Hear it, obey it, closely watch it and guard it. And this love is well described by Paul in 1 Corinthians 13. He says, love is patient and love is kind. Love does not envy and love does not boast. Love is not puffed up and love does not behave indecently. Love does not seek its own and love is not provoked. Love reckons not to do any evil and love does not rejoice over unrighteousness, but love rejoices in the truth. Love covers all, love believes all, love expects all, and love endures all. Love never fails. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. So we'll get into the Torah portion, and it's Vezot Haberachah. And it means what, Tommy?
Thanks, Joe. It's Vezot Haberachah.
Vezot Haberachah.
It's as usual, as always, it's one of the first words in the Torah portion. And once again, it's the first words in this parsha. Vezot, and this. HaBeracha, the blessing. In Hebrew, the word is usually assumed. It's nearly always just assumed. So you wouldn't have a word for is. So literally translated it says, and this, the blessing. But because the word is assumed, it's and this is the blessing. It's vit is and, zot is this, ha is there, beracha is blessing. And it comes from the root word barach, which means to abundantly bless, to kneel down even, to bow with respect, even to bring a gift to somebody. It's real kind of worship and praise. It's not just, it's a deeper word than just blessing itself. I think we've gone over this previously in another Torah portion. So the literal translation would be, and this the blessing, but it's, and this is the blessing.
Praise Yah, praise Yah. So we're going to go from Deuteronomy 33. And Vezot Haberachah is our final Torah portion in the entire series. And this week's parsha is the conclusion to Moses' life. Before his death, Moses blesses the tribes of Israel, each with their own individual blessing that is pronounced over them. And we get a snippet of a prophecy as well as a poetic statement that is spoken on the 12 tribes. He reminds them that God's Torah is their inheritance and that there is none like Yah who will guide them through the heavens and assist them. After the blessings are bestowed on the tribes, Moses then climbs Mount Nebo to experience the land of Israel firsthand prior to his death. And we've looked at this in the previous parshas, how Moses experienced, he saw with spiritual sight. He's seen something. When Yahweh shows you something, you're seeing something spiritual. He didn't just have a tour around the sand dunes or, check out some sandy hills. He experienced the land. There Moses is laid to rest at the age of 120 years old. His eyes had not yet become dim and his freshness had not yet departed. Significant thing in the text that we need to remember, and we'll look at that later. The children of Israel wept for Moses for 30 days. And when the days of mourning were finally over, Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the Spirit, as Moses had laid his hands upon him, and he would take up the mantle of leadership and finally lead the children into the promised land. So we'll start in chapter 33, and what we're going to see are the blessings that Moses puts upon the tribes before his farewell. And it's very symbolic because we've seen this prefigured previously as another event. We've seen Yaakov, Jacob, Israel, the father who got his 12 sons before him before his death, and he blessed his 12 sons prior to his death. And we see the same thing going on now. Moses blesses the 12 tribes prior to his death, and we see it again happen in the future in the time of our Messiah. So let us look at chapter 33. We'll read it, we'll go through to 34 because it's not that long, and we'll finish the Torah portion and we'll do a short study on what we've read. So with that, let us read Deuteronomy chapter 33. Do you want to read it, brother? Yeah.
And this is the blessing with which Moshe, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, Yahovah came from Sinai and rose from Seir for them. He shone forth from Mount Paran and came with 10,000s of set-apart ones at his right hand, a law of fire for them. Indeed, he loves the peoples. All his set-apart ones are in your hand. And they sat down at your feet, receiving your words. Moshe commanded us a Torah, an inheritance of the assembly of Yaakov. And he was sovereign in Yeshurun when the heads of the people were gathered, the tribes of Israel. Let Reuben live and not die, and let his men be numbered. And this of Yehudah, and he said, Hear Yahovah the voice of Yehudah, and bring him to his people. His hands shall fight for him, and you be a help against his enemies. And of Levi he said, Your Tumim and your Urim belong to your lovingly committed one, whom you tried at Massah, with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and mother, I have not seen them. And he did not acknowledge his brothers, or know his own children, for they have guarded your word and watched over your covenants. They teach your right rulings to Yaakov, your Torah to Yisrael. They put incense before you, and a complete ascending offering on your slaughter place. O Yahovah, bless his strength, and accept the work of his hands. Smite the loins of those who rise against him, and of those who hate him, that they rise no more. Of Binyamin he said, Let the beloved of Yahovah dwell in safety by him, shielding him all the day, as he dwells between his shoulders. And of Yosef he said, Blessed of Yahovah is his land, with the choicest from the heavens, with the dew and the deep lying beneath, with the choice fruits of the sun, with the choice yield of the months, with the finest of the ancient mountains and the choicest of the everlasting hills, with the choicest of all the earth and all that fills it, and the good pleasure of him who dwells in the bush. Let it come on the head of Yosef and on the crown of the head of him who is separate from his brothers. His splendour is like a firstborn bull, and his horns are like the horns of the wild ox. With them he pushes the peoples to the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. And of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, O Zebulun, in your going out, and Yissachar in your tents. They call peoples to the mountain. There they slaughter slaughterings of righteousness, for they draw from the riches of the seas, and treasures hidden in the sand. And of Gad he said, Blessed is he who enlarges Gad. He dwells as a lion, and shall tear off the arm, also the crown. And he chose the best for himself, for there the portion of the inscriber was hidden. And he came with the heads of the people. The righteousness of Yahovah he did, and his right rulings with Israel. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's cub that leaps from Bashan. And of Naphtali he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with pleasure and filled with the blessing of Yahovah, possess the west and the south. And of Asher he said, Asher is the most blessed of sons. Let him be accepted by his brothers and dip his foot in oil. Your sandals are iron and bronze, and your strength as your days. O Yeshurun, there is no one like Ale, riding the heavens to help you, and on the clouds in his excellency. The Elohim of old is a refuge, and beneath are everlasting arms. And he drives out the enemies from before you, and says, Destroy. Thus Yisrael dwells in safety, the fountains of Yaakov alone, in a land of grain and new wine. His heavens also drop down dew. Blessed are you, O Yisrael. Who is like you, a people saved by Yahovah, the shield of your help, and he who is the sword of your excellency? And your enemies are subdued for you, and you tread down their high places. And Moshe went up from the desert plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of the Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And Yahovah showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan. And all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Yehudah as far as the western sea, and the Negev, and the plains of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And Jehovah said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, Yitzhak, and to Yaakov, saying, To your seed I give it. I have let you look at it with your eyes, but you do not pass over there. And Moshe, the servant of Yahovah, died there in the land of Moab, according to the mouth of Yahovah. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, and no one knows his burial place to this day. And Moshe was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his freshness gone. And the children of Israel wept for Moshe in the desert plains of Moab 30 days. And the days of weeping and mourning for Moshe were completed. And Yehoshua son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moshe had laid his hands on him. And the children of Israel listened to him, and did as Yahovah had commanded Moshe. And since then no prophet has arisen in Israel like Moshe, whom Yahovah knew face to face. For all the signs and wonders which Yahovah sent him to do in the land of Mitzrayim, before Pharaoh, and before all his servants, and in all his land, and for all the strong hand, and all the great fearsome deeds which Moshe did before the eyes of all Israel. Selah.
Amen. And that concludes the Torah cycle. Hallelujah. Let's take a look at verse 1. This is the timeless blessing that is bestowed. Verse 1 says, And this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. The Torah concludes in the final setting of Moab, a short distance from the Jericho. The promised land not too far away in the horizon, and here Moses lifts up his final blessing to the tribes prior to his death. So though Moses was 120 years old, did we read just then how his eyes had not yet dimmed and that his appearance had not yet faded, his freshness was still there, it hadn't gone. Now, we spoke about how this event actually patterns Yaakov and the father of the 12 sons. Prior to his death, he blesses his sons and then he passes over, and we see a very similar picture happening here. But the health of the two men are quite the opposite, because Yaakov is in bed and he's frail and he can't see. That's what the text says. He can't see, and he looked ill and he was bedbound. However, Moses, he's smashing it. He can see well. He climbs up a mountain at 120. He's fresh. He's almost full of life, though faced with imminent death. So what does this mean? Now, we've been looking over the past year at the similarities between Yeshua and Moses. Yeshua is a prophet like unto Moses, isn't he? They have strikingly similarities. So what does this actually mean? Yeshua was a prophet like unto Moses and not Jacob. And we've seen the parallels between both of these men and how they are prophetically connected. Moses was meant to look full of life, though he was faced with imminent death. In the same way, Yeshua, though he was stained by the scars of death from the crucifixion, was full of new life. He was resurrected and he was given life. And in the same way, before Yeshua passed on and ascended to the Father in heaven, he gathered the disciples and he climbed the Mount of Olives and he blessed his disciples before he passed on to his Father's place. So we see a picture here, don't we? Now, did anyone count the amount of tribes?
11.
You beat me to it. Moses blesses 11 tribes. How many tribes are there?
12.
There's 12. In the same manner that Yeshua took the disciples up to the Mount of Olives and blessed them prior to him moving on to the Father, we see Moses do the same thing. There was 11 tribes. There was only 11 disciples. Judas was not there. Judas was not present. Judas was not present at the time Yeshua blessed the 11 disciples. This is why there is only 11 tribes that are blessed, that are spoken of in the scriptures. And many people say, but Simeon was part of Levi and, maybe he did bless them, they're just not in the text. We don't see it. There was only 11 tribes blessed. There was only 11 disciples blessed at Yeshua's ascent to the Father. Luke 24, 50 to 51. When he led them out of the vicinity of Bethany, which is the Mount of Olives, he lifted up his hands and blessed them. While he was blessing them, he left them and was taken up to heaven. Moses prefigured Yeshua. That's why his eyes were not yet dim and he was fresh, full of face. It was almost as though he was alive and could go and keep going. He had the fullness of the life, the words of life, and he met God face to face, and he's prefiguring Yeshua even though he's faced with imminent death. And Yeshua had the scars of death upon him. You could see that he'd been through death as he showed the disciples the scars on his hands, and he was resurrected and brought back to life, and he blesses the 11 disciples. So we see this prophetically taking place, past, present and future. We see it happening with Yaakov, then we see it happening with Moses, and then we see it happening with Yeshua in the end. The book of Acts tells us that all disciples were present at this time. Curiously, Moses only blesses 11 of the 12 tribes, and there is many reasons why Moses does this. The sages can argue between themselves, but we focus on the pattern of Yeshua. That's what we do, don't we? We as Messianic believers. And he too only blessed 11 disciples, as Judas would not have been present with them at this time. There would only have been 11 disciples present and blessed, just like there was only 11 tribes blessed. So I just wanted to give you a bit of food for thought there.
Yeah, why do you think he done that? Do you know?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
If you look at the blessings that Moses bestows upon the 11, they all turn out to be attributes of Yeshua.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The only attribute he hasn't got is the one that Judas bore.
Yeah,
As in
wow.
he was the treacherous one.
Oh, wow.
He was the sinner, basically.
Yeah,
He was
wow.
the wrong one.
Beautiful.
And that doesn't tally with what the attributes of Yeshua are.
Oh, wow.
Hallelujah. Praise God. Let's look at verse 4. So prior to him going into the blessings, Deuteronomy 33 verse 4, we speak now of the Torah being an inheritance, and I love this verse. Moses commanded us a Torah, an inheritance for the assembly of Yaakov. Now Moses proclaims that he's charged the people with a Torah and that it's an inheritance for them. Now any time we see the word assembly, what does the word assembly translate?
It's a gathering of people.
It's a gathering, it's kahala, and it means an ecclesias, it means a church, it means church. Kahal is where we get the word church from, and it means an assembly, a sacred gathering, a bunch of people. It means the congregation, it means the congregation of God. So in that regard, verse 4 could actually render, and Moses commanded us a Torah, an inheritance of the church of Israel. That's what this verse could render. Now this statement is bold and profound, of course, and we should all cherish such words from the scroll. The Torah is our eternal heritage as the Church of Christ, because we worship the King of Israel. Remember, Jesus was King of the Jews. What does it say in Scripture? That Pilate had a sign made above the cross, and it stated King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. He is of the tribe of Judah. He is the King of the Jews, of course. The Torah is our heritage and it is our inheritance. It is our possession to take hold of. The Lord invites anyone to be part of this. Anyone can be part of the covenant. Anyone can inherit the land, what the Bible speaks of. And when we do possess the Torah and we take it in as part of our being, it changes us, it manufactures us further into the image of Christ. And the Torah is our inheritance. It's a beautiful thing to know, because we are the church of Christ. We are the assembly of God. And Acts, the book of Acts, tells us that the assembly began in the wilderness. The assembly began in the wilderness. So the church began all the way back with Moses. And we are doing the same walk. We are called to walk as he walked. So it flows through each part of our human existence and becomes almost fabricated in our reality. That's how the Torah sort of becomes so real in your life. It's almost like stitched into the fabric of your life, your framework, everything you do and think about, the meditations of your mind and the actions of your hand, whether you know it consciously or subconsciously. Each day you're thinking about Yah, and each day you're thinking about your identity in him. And when you put your tzitzis on, or when you decide not to eat the unclean, or when you decide to lift up incense like a priest, each thing is now incorporated to every aspect of your life. You're thinking, breathing, living the word of Yah. It is your inheritance. It is your heritage, as the scriptures say. Let's read it again. Moses commanded us a Torah, an inheritance, of the church of Israel. Let's have a look at Ephesians 5, verse 1 through to 2. Because there is the Jews, but the Jews are just one tribe of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Jews are just one tribe. So to the Jew, the Torah is a heritage by identity. And it's through their patrimony, and it's driven through obedience, and it's who they are for what they've inherited. And people say, yeah, okay, but that's a religion. And it's true, it is a religion. And we move away from that word because we say it's relationship, because we're driven by love. We're driven by obedience and being fractured and cursed and punished and feeling the weight of the oppression of the law. We're driven by love, and it's wrote on our hearts. We know that we can never achieve it in its fullest, and we know that we've got an advocate with Yeshua, and he is our high priest. He is our offering for when we slip and we stumble, we can return back to him ultimately. So to Israel, grafted in through faith in Messiah, it is written upon our hearts, and it crafts us into the image of Christ, to walk as he walked, to be imitators of him as he is an imitator of the Father. So let's see Ephesians 5 verse 1 through to 2. Would you like to read it, Jonathan?
Yeah. Therefore be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and walk in love just as Messiah also loved us, and gave himself up for us as an offering and sacrifice to God for a fragrant aroma.
Praise Yah. And walk in love as Christ also loved us, and he gave himself up as an offering, a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling aroma. If we walk as he walked, we should love as he loved. Many people say, oh, I do the Torah walk. Well, do you walk in love? Because if you're not walking in the love of Christ, then don't talk to me about the Torah walk, because Christ walked in love, and that is the Torah. So if you're missing the greatest commandment to love, forget it. Just forget it, because the Bible says, he who does not commit adultery, but he who steals, is a transgressor of the Torah. So you're still going to be a transgressor. We want to focus on the weightier matter, the greatest commandment that covers the rest, because love covers a multitude of sins, a multitude of transgressions. Let us get the love right to walk like our Messiah did. It then goes on to say, as Christ loved us, because we were loved first. That's what makes us love Jesus. That's what makes us fall in love with the Christ, with our Father, because we know that he is love and that he loves us, and we feel his love and therefore love him in return. It's a beautiful poetic love story. It goes on to say, and he gave himself up as a sacrifice to God. He gave himself up as a sacrifice. If we love our neighbour as we love ourselves, if we are a living sacrifice, then therefore we will elevate that person above ourselves, because we are loving them as we love ourselves. And if we've gone to the foot of the cross and we've crucified the flesh, we should be able to endure all, cover all, believe all, and expect all, and not want nothing in return, because that is the definition of selflessness. And this is the gospel: to become selfless, to become selflessness, and to walk ultimately as he walked. And what does it say? To become a sweet aroma to God. To be pleasant to Yah, to be pleasant. So let's have a look at what the word inheritance actually means. In the dictionary, we get a physical or a mental characteristic that's passed on. A treasure, a land grant, or a possession that is passed on. That's what an inheritance means. An inheritance. So let's tie this all together, because we as believers actually cover each one of them words. If we look at it again, this is the definition: a physical or mental characteristic that's passed on. Oh, you know, I've inherited that off my dad. Oh, I know, yeah, I do that all the time. It's a physical or a mental characteristic that's passed on. Or you could get something in your will. Oh, I've inherited the house off my granddad. A treasure, land grant, or a possession. So let's tie this together, because I truly believe we as believers actually cover each one of them words that is found in the dictionary, and how we mentally inherit the characteristics of Christ. Romans 12 verse 2 says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." We are mentally inheriting that what is holy. We are physically inheriting his behaviour. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, then they are a new creature, they are a new creation. The old creation is gone, and here is the new." Physically we become changed. We inherit him physically, and we then are manufactured and able to operate in this life, not to try and earn our way to heaven, but because he is in us and he seeps through us, and we want to bless people and love people and serve, and we want to make ourselves low and make people high, and we want to wash their feet, not to get ourselves to heaven, but because we physically inherited this behaviour. It's an inheritance. It's an inheritance, and it's to be passed on. This is what it says: you will mentally or physically have these things passed on to you. John 14:26, Yeshua says, "But I will pass on the Comforter, the Ruach. I will give you the Spirit." That's what happens. This Spirit is not something we've created. Just like you, when you inherit something in a will, you know, you may not have built the house, but you got it. You know, it's almost of another source, and the source is Yeshua, and he's given it to us. It's passed on to us. Then we see the words a treasure, a land grant, or a possession. Well, we attain treasures in heaven through doing this walk, and we have a possession in the promised land. Are we starting to see how the scriptures is truly an inheritance, and it is our heritage, and it's alive, isn't it? Matthew 6, Jesus said, "Do not store up for yourself treasures in earth, but instead store up treasures in heaven, where moth will not eat and rust will not destroy." Hebrews 13 verse 14, "We do not have a permanent city here, but we look forward to the city that is to come," because that is permanent. 1 Peter 1:4 says, "And into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, reserved in the Shemayim in heaven for you." And in Genesis 13:15, Yahweh says, "I am giving all this land to you, as far as you can see, to you and your descendants as a permanent possession."
Hallelujah.
That's the inheritance. It can be a physical or a mental characteristic, right? It can be a land grant, a treasure, or a possession. And we've just covered how the gospel and the Torah fulfill all of them 5 things. The definition of an inheritance is more than just getting to the land. It's inheriting his behaviour. It's inheriting his characteristics. It's inheriting his mentality. It's inheriting the treasures in heaven that he has stored up for you. It's inheriting the words of life that transform you and others around you. It's mind-blowing. So when we read this simple verse, let's go back to it. Verse 4, Moses commanded the Torah, an inheritance to the church of Israel. And we start to see how it truly is an inheritance, that it's passed on from our forefathers.
Yeah, it just takes a free gift to a whole other level, doesn't it?
It just takes a free gift to a whole other level. I love it, bro. Truly it does. There's so much inside of this that when we investigate, because you can just go an inheritance to the assembly of Yaakov. Well, I'm not the assembly. Didn't know Yaakov. And the Torah isn't for us, and you've just totally bypassed the fact that even in the book of Genesis, God promises to Abraham and to Abraham's seed that the land will be your permanent possession, and it matters to us under the Abrahamic covenant of faith, and we are grafted in because what does the scriptures say in the gospel? If you're Abraham's seed, if you're Messiah's, then you're Abraham's seed. It's for you. It's your inheritance. It's a beautiful thing to take a hold of. The Torah is our inheritance. It crafts us further into our identity within Christ. It brings us together as a nation with standards that are beyond ourselves. And it's true because we didn't come up with justice. It exists beyond us. We didn't come up with righteousness. It comes from the heavens like the dew that falls down like rain. We have inherited his ways and it has been passed on to us. And we read the patriarchs, but sometimes we forget about all the people that got burned at a stake for translating the words of life into English, who were persecuted by the church or come after and beheaded for standing in the truth. We forget all these people. But we read in Revelations that they all matter to Yeshua and their prayers have been heard, you know. It has been passed to us and we have treasures stored up for us and a promised land that one day awaits us. This is our inheritance and we've just read it now and it sparks so many thoughts and it gets me so excited because it's real, it's really happening and I can see it in everyone's life. I can see it in everyone's life. So we're going to move on to the blessings now. Go ahead, Ange.
Just to finish off, my Bible references to Psalm 119
Beautiful.
and 111. Your testimonies I have taken as a heritage, and again that's cross-referenced as inheritance. So your testimonies I have taken as an inheritance forever, for they are the rejoicing of my heart. I have inclined my heart to perform your statutes forever to the very end.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
That's beautiful, that one. Thank you for sharing that.
The Psalm of Psalms.
The Psalm of Psalms. So, Tommy's right. The blessings that are then spoken on the 11 tribes by Moses are actually a characteristic of Yeshua and refer to our Messiah in one way or another. Don't forget, he is the fulfillment of the Godhead. He is the head of the body. He is the King of Israel. So no wonder each tribe relates to him in one way or another, but we're not going to go through them all this week. We're going to focus on the two most important, the two titles that Yeshua goes by. Well, let's not say the most important, the two obvious. We've been studying a lot this Torah cycle about what the two names of Yeshua, Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. That's what we've been studying. So we're going to focus on Judah and Ephraim, Joseph. That's what we're going to focus on. Let's first then have a look at the blessing for Judah. And it's in verse 7. It's Deuteronomy 33 and it's verse 7. And it says this. And this of Judea, he said, hear Yahweh the voice of Judah and bring him to his people. His hands shall fight for him and you be a help against his enemies. You could just brush past that and not know that there's a cryptic message hidden inside that's referencing Yeshua. Listen to it again. Hear the voice Yahweh, the voice of Judea, and bring him to his people. Singular masculine pronoun. Him is the Mashiach who comes from the root of David, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. And what shall he do? His hands shall fight for him, and he shall be a help against his enemies. It's powerful. There's a hidden cryptic message about Yeshua in this blessing. Moses gave and preordained a prophecy that Messiah will come through the line of Judah. As part of Moses' blessing, he states, bring him to his people. It's a curious bit of language, but we already know that Yeshua comes through the line of Judah. Revelations 5:5, and one of the elders said to me, weep no more, behold, the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has what? Has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and the seven seals. And we've just seen the prophecy, the blessing that is given, that Moses says he will use his hand, he will fight against. And then we see in Revelations 5:5 that the conquering line of Judah is Yeshua from the root of David. So we've just seen that part of Judah's blessing is totally related to the Messiah, and you could just brush past it and just not know what it meant, but it's him, bring him to his people, singular masculine pronoun. That's what does it for me. Let's have a look at Joseph then, because this is my favourite, and it's not because my name is Joseph. Deuteronomy 33 verse 13. It says, and of Joseph he said, blessed of Yahweh is his land, with the choicest from heavens, with the dew and with the deep lying beneath, with the choice of fruits of the sun, with the choice yield of the months, with the finest of the ancient mountains, with the choicest of everlasting hills, with the choice of earth and all that fills it, and the good pleasure of him who dwells in the bush. Forgive me. Let it come on the head of Joseph, and the crown, the head of him who was separated from his brothers. His splendour is like the firstborn bull, and his horns are like the horns of a wild ox, and he pushes the people to the ends of the earth. And they are the 10,000 of Ephraim and the 1,000 of Manasseh. So this blessing, let's dissect it and have a look at it. We see that the ox comes up, don't we? The Aleph. Yeshua is the Aleph and the Tav. The ox in Hebrew, ancient pictograph, was the A. It's the Aleph. It's the beginning. And it's symbolic of the king who wears a crown. Yeshua is the firstborn son. And as it says in this blessing, in verse 16, it says, he is your good pleasure of him who dwelt within the bush. Of him who dwelt within the bush. Let's go to Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 to 4. There's loads of other things in that, he is the first fruits, because we read that he's the first fruits, that in the blessing, well, Yeshua is the vine, the good pleasure. Exodus chapter 3 verse 1 to 4 says, now Moses was tending to the flock of his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within the bush. Moses saw the bush was on fire and it did not burn. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight of why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him from within the bush. Within the bush. This is what we see, that the Lord appeared within the bush and the Lord called to him from within the bush. So there's a clear cryptic message that Yeshua is Yehovah, Messiah ben Joseph, whose blessing speaks that he is the good pleasure, and he who dwells within the bush is in total reference to the fact that Yeshua, the messenger of the Lord, dwelt within the bush and spoke to Moses from within the bush. I mean, that's just what I see in there. Yeshua is crowned King Eternal. He is the one who spoke from within the bush to Moses. And I believe that this blessing upon Joseph gives reference to that. Alright, let's get back to the Torah portion, and we're nearly finished. We've only got 2 more things to speak of, and then we are done. You okay, hon?
Yeah, boy.
I said, are you okay? Severe, John's like. Do you want a cup of sweet on?
I've got some.
Alright. Okay, let's have a look at verse 16. Let it come on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who separated from his brothers. Yeshua is the king. He will wear the crown. He does wear the crown. He was hated and despised by his brothers in the same way that Joseph was. So we read in the blessing that the crown comes on the head of Joseph, who was separated from his brothers. And there's a bit of a paradox there, because his brothers despised him and he went to Egypt, but that's where he was glorified. And this is what we see going on with Yeshua. He was despised by his people and killed, but that was what gave him his majesty, and that was how he was crowned. So it's very symbolic. John 1 verse 11 says, he came to his own, and his own did not receive him, in the same way that Joseph's brothers despised him, but it was Joseph's glory in the end. Psalm 22 verse 6, I am but a worm and not a man, scorned by men and despised by the people. Isaiah 53 verse 3, he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom the people hid their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. And we start to see how Messiah ben Yosef gains his crown through the separation of his brothers, and it's the same picture of Yeshua, who gained his majesty. Though he was despised by the Jews and he was persecuted by the people he was close to, he gained his glory. Go ahead, bro.
It says as well that, I don't know, power quoting like, but doesn't it say a prophet's not welcome in his own country?
Yes, yeah. The scriptures say that too, yeah, bro. Yes,
Genesis 49:26. The blessings of the Father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bound and the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, on the crown of the head of him who was separated from his brothers.
Beautiful. It's a similar blessing that Yaakov gives. It's very similar. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought you were putting your hand up. So the final bit of this, it speaks of how the wild ox, and if you've ever typed in, because I went to see what a wild ox looked like. Why a wild ox? Why a wild ox? If you type in wild ox, they don't get the horns trimmed and they grow in these shapes, and you can see where the word bulldozer comes from, because this is powerful. This beast of the field is so powerful. It's a wild ox and its horns untamed, and we read that he pushes the people to the ends of the earth. Well, we see that Yeshua comes back to gather in the harvest, and every eye will see him from the four corners of the earth. Numbers 23 verse 22, God brings them out of Egypt. He is like the horns of a wild ox. Numbers 24 verse 8, God brings them out from Egypt. He is for him like the horns of a wild ox. He will devour the nations and his adversary. He will crush their bones into pieces and shatter them with his arrows. Powerful. So finally, we are going to have a look at when Moses has finished the blessing. We see almost a grand blessing that Moses gives. In verse 28 it says, thus Israel dwells in safety, the fountain of Jacob alone. In the land of grain and new wine, his heavens drop down like dew. Blessed are you, O Israel. Who is like you? A people saved by Yahweh, the shield of your help, and he who has the sword of your excellency. And your enemies are subdued before you, and you tread down their high places. You tread down their high places. I just want to reiterate, if there is anything, any enemy, anything that you believe is bigger than you, remember that this blessing is for you. That Yahweh, he saves you. He is the shield of your help. He who is the sword of your excellency. And your enemies are subdued before you. And you tread down their what? They're high places. Ephesians 6 verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness. Where? In high places. Tread them down. Tread them down. He will crush the head of the serpent, and it will bruise his heel. We do this through the commission of Yeshua. We do it through his strength. And his heel has already been bruised. And he gave the commission to what? Tread and trample underfoot scorpions and snakes. So if you ever feel in the presence of your enemy, or if you believe that there is anything higher than you in this life, remember, through the power of God, through the healing source of Messiah, and through the great commission that he has given you, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual wickedness in high places. Please remember this. Yahweh, who is like you, the shield of your help, the sword of your excellency. Your enemies are subdued before you, and you tread down their high places. They are trodden down underfoot. What's up, Bex?
Don't you be excited for his trial to see the miracles? Yeah, that's what I do.
Praise Yah, hallelujah. So the last point we're going to make now, and it's in chapter 34, and we're finishing off. And it's verse 1, it says, And Moses went up from the desert, plains of Moab, to Mount Nebo, atop of the Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And Yahweh showed him the land as far as Dan, and all of Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the land of Yehudah as far as the western sea. And Yahweh said to him, This is the land which I swore to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov, saying, To your seed I give it. I have let you look with your eyes, but you do not pass over there. So Moses seen the promised land, and he didn't just see it, he experienced it. So how do we know this? How do we know? Because we've made things and we've looked in the Hebrew and we said, well, yeah, you know, Nasai, Raim, he's seen it spiritually, he felt it. And I was meditating a little bit on this, and I started to see in the text that if we look at verse 1 and then we look at verse 2, we're actually seeing the land that is to be the tribes. He speaks as though the land is already possessed, because he says, he showed him the land of Gilead as far as Dan. Well, that's a tribe, and that's where they're going to settle. And Ephraim and Manasseh. And the land of the Judea as far as the western sea. It's almost as like he's speaking this in future tense, as though he's seen where these tribes are actually going to settle. And that's how he knows the names of these places. It's like he could have said, and he took him up and showed him the land of Canaan, and the trees and the desert hills and the little waterfall down there by the Galilee. But he doesn't. He takes him up and he shows him the land of Dan, the Pisgah, the site of Jericho, where Naphtali will dwell, and Ephraim and Manasseh and the Yehudah as far as the western sea. And he starts reeling off these locations where the tribes are actually going to dwell and settle. So he is seeing into the future. And I'd never seen it like that before. And you think, well, yeah, you know, if you lived in Liverpool and you went back in the time machine, you'd still call it by the land that you knew. Well, not if it was a barren place. Not if no one dwelt there. Surely he would say he showed him the land of Canaan, which would be the future possession of these places. But he speaks it as though it's future tense. He's saying, this is going to be the land. This is where these tribes are going to dwell. And it's almost as though Moses has seen it. He's not being there, he's not experiencing it, but he's seeing it. Go ahead, bro.
I think that's just as you were speaking then, when it comes to healings and casting out demons, you know, we see in the New Testament the successful, you know, when these demons are cast out successfully, it's always the person who's saying Yeshua's name is saying it like it's already a done deal.
Future tense.
It's a future tense. It's already happened, and this is, you know, Israel's going to have to go to war with these other nations. But Moses has that faith and is speaking in a future tense that they're already defeated.
Yes.
Just as you speak about the demons, they're already defeated.
Precisely.
So it's just having that
precisely
that faith.
And he's seeing that these are actually going to go to these specific locations and they're going to dwell there, and this is going to be Ephraim's land and this is going to be Dan's land, and he's speaking, showing him that this is where these tribes are going to dwell. Can we see that in the text? Does anyone see that, or does anyone not see that? Do we see it? Do we understand it?
I think we can relate it to our lives though, that the struggles that we have, we need to have more authority, if we're feeling it's from God, that it's done, he's went before us.
Precisely.
Speaking about
it's a done deal.
Also, it says, without vision, people perish. So Moses has got the vision to see us so that the people won't perish.
Praise God, praise God. Very nice.
My Bible, where it says Judah as far as Western Sea, it's called the Mediterranean. It says the Western Sea is the Mediterranean.
Yeah, beautiful. So Moses seen the promised land, and he speaks of it in the future tense as though this was already the tribe's land, settled, conquered and inherited, because we see the names of the specific locations of where the tribes are going to dwell, as though it had already happened. The text doesn't say that Moses was shown the deserts and the trees and some future land to come in Canaan. It's as though it's a prophecy within the text. It's as though Moses himself quite literally sees the tribes in their future quarters. Let us remind ourselves that when Yahweh shows you something firsthand, you're going to have a spiritual experience. He didn't just float around and say, check out them sand dunes. He showed him. So Yahweh, Yud He Vav He, past, present and future. When the past, present and future shows you something, you're going to see it. And that's why we see a nod at Abraham. Because then we see the land which was promised to Abraham. So it's my belief that that Moses seen past, present and future. We get the nod to Abraham. He probably seen, understood and knew what had gone before with the seed and the inheritance. He then seen the tribes being allotted in these places, and even he seen himself in the second resurrection going into the promised land, and that's what made him so secure to climb that mount, to let himself rest. He was so secure in it.
Amen.
He's seen with spiritual vision. He's seen it all, the inheritance of the seed, right up until the second coming and the second resurrection. A vision from Yah is more than what we see with our eyes. And they say what? A picture speaks 1,000 words. Well, a vision from God speaks 1,000,000.
Truly.
A vision from God speaks 1,000,000.
Truly.
So just to wrap this up, from atop of the mountain, Moses receives a glimpse of the promised land. But he hadn't had the fullness of the encounter. He obtained only a taste of what he travelled so long to attain. Like Moses, we have now come to the end of the journey. We stand at the very edge of the scroll, peering into the future. After completing the Torah cycle, one might be tempted to have the mindset that, we've completed the Torah and we've attained the knowledge and we've got its fullness because we've done the cycle. But at the end of the cycle, even by the end of today, we come to the realization that we have only glimpsed it. Like Moses, we have had a vision. We know the ending because God has told us. We haven't experienced it, but we know it because our faith is so secure, and we have faith in that what is unseen and surety and certainty of what we do not understand. Like Moses, we have peered into the future with the word of God. He has given us the truth. He's given us the future. We haven't yet had every tear wiped away from our eyes, but we know it happens. We haven't yet seen with our eyes the New Jerusalem descending on high like a bride adorned, but we know it will occur. We haven't yet been given our new bodies and given our new homes, but we know that we will. We haven't yet had our feet walk upon the sea of glass in the New Jerusalem, but we know we will. We haven't yet seen the spectacle of the kingdom of heaven and homes being built out of sapphire and gates out of onyx and beautiful crystals, but we know one day we will. We haven't yet walked side by side with the epistles in paradise. We haven't yet been resurrected with the people that we've lost, but we know one day we will. We haven't yet sat down to eat with Yeshua, but none of us can wait for that day.
Amen.
We haven't yet been resurrected from the dead, but we know when death comes that we will be.
Amen.
We know, like Moses knew, that paradise awaits us in the end, because we have faith, like Moses had faith, in the things unseen. And we love and trust the God who goes before us, because he has written the story already. And we're going to finish in Revelation 21 verse 1 to 7. Tommy, would you like to read it for us, bro?
Certainly. 21, 27.
One to 7, please.
21.
Yes, please.
And I saw a renewed heaven and a renewed earth, for the former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea is no more. And I, John, saw the set apart city, renewed Jerusalem, coming down out of the heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the heaven saying, See, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God. And God shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, no mourning, nor crying, and there shall be no more pain, for the former matters have passed away. And he who was sitting on the throne said, See, I make all matters new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and trustworthy. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end. To the one who thirsts, I shall give of the fountain of water of life without payment. The one who overcomes shall inherit all this, and I shall be his God, and he shall be my son.
So though we have not yet experienced that, like Moses, we know that it is going to happen. We trust that it will. We have security, we have faith, and we know that that is a certain truth. And because of this, let us faith be made stronger. Let us have the courage like Moses to climb that mountain when faced with death. Because one day we will go to the land and we will be led by our King Yeshua.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. And with that, we will finish and we will pray.
Bless you, Joseph.
Thank you.